He did something huge for you in secret. Now the third party has lost their grip and is desperately searching for answers. My beloved child. The third party thought they had more time. More time to keep your soulmate uncertain. More time to make your connection feel distant. More time to quietly convince themselves that nothing between you and your soulmate would ever truly change. But something happened that they never prepared for. Your soulmate made a move. Quietly, deliberately, and without asking anyone for permission. And when the third party realized what had happened, their confidence disappeared almost instantly. Because this wasn't another emotional moment that could be talked away tomorrow. Your soulmate had crossed a line inside themselves, and there was no easy way to return to who they had been before. But here is what makes this even more unsettling for the third party: the decision wasn't sudden. Your soulmate had apparently been thinking about it much longer than anyone knew. For a while, your soulmate had been noticing things they once ignored. Little contradictions. Conversations that left them strangely drained. Moments when the third party seemed unusually interested in whether you were still somewhere in their thoughts. At first, your soulmate tried to dismiss those details. They told themselves they were imagining patterns that weren't really there. But then one small incident changed the atmosphere completely. Something was said about you, something meant to make your soulmate pull further away, and instead of agreeing, your soulmate became silent. Not confused. Not persuaded. Silent in that dangerous way people become when something finally makes sense. That was the moment your soulmate began looking backward at everything differently. Don't skip, because what they recognized next explains why the third party suddenly became so nervous. Your soulmate realized that some of the fear surrounding this connection may never have belonged to them in the first place. And that realization changed their behavior. Your soulmate stopped explaining every feeling. They stopped revealing every thought. Most importantly, they stopped giving the third party the reassurance they had grown accustomed to receiving. The third party noticed immediately. They started asking careful questions, testing your soulmate's mood, searching for some sign that everything was still under control. But your soulmate gave them almost nothing. Then came the one thing the third party had feared for longer than they ever admitted: your soulmate finally acted on what they felt instead of merely thinking about it. Not dramatically. Not publicly. It was a private decision, which made it even harder to stop. And somehow, you were at the center of it. The third party only discovered what had changed after the choice had already been made, and when they understood exactly what your soulmate had quietly set into motion concerning you, one question terrified them more than anything else: was there still enough time to undo it? The answer began revealing itself sooner than the third party expected. Your soulmate wasn't simply thinking about you again. They had quietly removed one of the biggest barriers that had kept them from following those feelings. It may have been a promise they no longer wanted to honor, a boundary created under pressure, or an understanding that had kept them emotionally trapped in the same place. Whatever form it took, your soulmate changed it without announcing the decision first. That mattered. Because the third party had always depended on one belief. Whenever your soulmate got close to making a real move toward you, hesitation would eventually pull them back. This time, hesitation didn't win. And when the third party sensed that familiar safety net was gone, they asked your soulmate a question they had avoided for a very long time: "Are you still thinking about them?" Your soulmate didn't answer immediately, but the expression on their face said enough to make the room feel different. What happened afterward was even more revealing. Instead of denying your importance, your soulmate asked a question of their own: "Why does it bother you so much?" That single sentence shifted everything. Suddenly, the third party was the one searching for an explanation. They tried to make their concern sound reasonable, perhaps claiming they were protecting your soulmate from disappointment or preventing an old situation from becoming complicated again. But your soulmate had heard versions of those explanations before. This time, they noticed something underneath the words: fear. Not fear that your soulmate would get hurt. Fear that your soulmate might finally discover what would happen if they stopped listening to everyone else and trusted their own feelings about you. Stay till the end, because your soulmate didn't argue. They simply listened, watched, and allowed the third party to keep talking. And the longer that conversation continued, the more the third party accidentally revealed. Then your soulmate heard one detail they weren't supposed to hear. It was small enough that someone else might have missed it, but your soulmate caught it immediately. The third party referred to something involving you that your soulmate had never personally told them. For one suspended moment, neither of them spoke. Your soulmate's mind raced backward through previous conversations, suddenly questioning how much had been happening behind the scenes. "How did you know that?" they finally asked. The third party tried to change the subject, but it was already too late. Your soulmate had recognized the mistake. And instead of confronting them further, your soulmate did something far more unexpected. They ended the conversation, walked away, and privately made another decision concerning you. The third party still didn't know exactly what it was. But within hours, they noticed something had disappeared from your soulmate's life, and that discovery told them their remaining time might already be gone. What disappeared wasn't something meaningless. It was one of the quiet ways the third party had been able to influence your soulmate's choices, an access point they assumed would always remain open. Maybe it was constant communication, an old agreement, or simply the privilege of knowing every move your soulmate planned to make. Suddenly, that access was gone. Messages received shorter answers. Personal questions were met with silence. And when the third party tried to bring you into the conversation again, your soulmate calmly stopped them. "Don't speak for them," they said. 5 simple words, but they carried a message the third party understood immediately. Your soulmate was no longer allowing someone else to define who you were or what your connection meant. Something huge was waiting beneath that change, because your soulmate wasn't only defending you now. They were beginning to question every story they had been told about why staying away from you was supposedly the safest choice. That night, your soulmate went back through memories they had avoided for a long time. Conversations with you. Moments when something genuine almost broke through, only for doubt to appear afterward. They began noticing a disturbing pattern. Some of their strongest hesitation had arrived after speaking with the same person who was now terrified of losing influence. That didn't automatically prove every suspicion, but it was enough to make your soulmate stop trusting the old narrative. Then one particular memory surfaced. There had been a moment when your soulmate wanted to reach toward you, but they were persuaded to wait because the timing wasn't right. They had believed there would always be another opportunity. Now they understood something painful: waiting had become a habit, and someone else had benefited from every delay. That realization created a question your soulmate could no longer ignore. If they kept waiting for perfect circumstances, what if one day you stopped waiting altogether? That possibility changed everything. For the first time, your soulmate imagined a future where you had moved forward without them. Not because the connection meant nothing, but because they had taken too long to honor it. And suddenly, the risk of reaching toward you felt smaller than the risk of losing the opportunity completely. So your soulmate picked up their phone. They opened something connected directly to you and stayed there for several seconds, staring at the screen while every old warning echoed through their mind. The third party had spent so much time fearing this exact moment because once your soulmate acted independently, there would be no controlling what happened next. And then your soulmate finally moved their finger toward the screen. But before they could complete what they were about to do, a message appeared from the third party, and the words inside it revealed that they somehow knew exactly what your soulmate was preparing to do. The message was short, but the timing made your soulmate's stomach tighten. It wasn't a direct accusation. The third party was more careful than that. They wrote something that sounded almost casual: "Please don't make a decision tonight that you'll regret tomorrow." Your soulmate stared at those words because there was one obvious problem: the third party had no reason to know a decision was being made at all. Nothing had been announced. No plan had been shared. And yet somehow, they were reacting before anything had even happened. That changed the question completely. Your soulmate was no longer wondering whether the third party disliked the idea of you two reconnecting. Now they were wondering how closely their choices had been watched. Instead of responding, your soulmate placed the phone down and replayed the last few weeks in their mind. Then another detail surfaced, one they had dismissed before, and suddenly the third party's strange timing didn't feel accidental anymore. There had been several moments when your soulmate privately considered reaching toward you, only for the third party to appear with exactly the right warning at exactly the right time. Once could have been coincidence. Twice could still be explained away. But now your soulmate could see a pattern, and patterns are difficult to ignore once you recognize them. So they did something unexpected. They didn't confront the third party. They didn't reveal what they had discovered. Instead, your soulmate deliberately mentioned a false possibility, something harmless but believable, and waited to see what happened. Don't skip, because the reaction came faster than expected. The third party immediately began discouraging that imaginary decision, offering reasons your soulmate should reconsider. That was when your soulmate understood something important: the third party wasn't simply responding to circumstances. They had become accustomed to influencing them. But this time, they had unknowingly shown your soulmate exactly where their fear was coming from. And strangely, your soulmate didn't become angry. They became clear. The confusion that had kept them frozen started falling away because they finally understood why the third party needed more time. Every extra day of hesitation gave them another opportunity to plant doubt, redirect attention, or convince your soulmate that approaching you was too risky. But that opportunity was disappearing. Your soulmate looked again at the message they had almost sent you, and this time there was no trembling hesitation. They changed something in it. One sentence that made their intention far more unmistakable, then paused before taking the final step. Because reaching toward you was no longer just about missing you. It meant choosing their own truth despite everything they had been told. And just as your soulmate prepared to follow through, they noticed something about the third party's earlier message that they had completely overlooked. One specific phrase matched words from a private conversation that only you and your soulmate were supposed to know. That phrase stopped your soulmate cold. They read it once, then again, because there was no reasonable explanation for why the third party would use those exact words. It wasn't a common expression. It carried meaning that belonged to a private moment between you and your soulmate, a conversation neither of you had intended anyone else to hear about. Suddenly, the mystery became much bigger than interference or unwanted advice. Your soulmate began wondering whether something from the past had been repeated, misunderstood, or deliberately carried from one person to another. Instead of reacting emotionally, they searched their memory for every possible way those words could have escaped that private space. Then one forgotten moment returned with startling clarity. Months earlier, your soulmate had trusted someone with a small piece of that conversation, believing it would remain confidential. And that person had a connection to the third party. Now the third party's confidence started making sense. They hadn't simply been guessing how your soulmate felt about you. They may have known enough fragments to anticipate when those feelings were becoming stronger. That explained the perfectly timed warnings. The sudden questions. The strange attempts to bring up your name whenever your soulmate seemed emotionally distant. But there was something the third party hadn't anticipated. Once your soulmate recognized the pattern, every old conversation began sounding different. Your soulmate remembered being told that you had probably moved on, that contacting you might disturb your peace, that reopening the connection would only create confusion. Those statements had once sounded protective. Now they sounded suspiciously convenient. Your soulmate didn't know which claims were true and which had been assumptions, and that uncertainty created an urgent need they could no longer suppress. They didn't want another person interpreting you for them. They wanted the truth directly from you. So your soulmate made the decision the third party had been desperately trying to delay. They stopped asking whether reaching out was perfectly timed. They stopped waiting for reassurance. And most importantly, they stopped allowing someone else's fear to determine what happened between the two of you. Your soulmate returned to the message they had written, removed the cautious sentence that softened everything, and replaced it with something unmistakably sincere. Their finger hovered over the final button. This was the moment the third party had feared, the moment your soulmate chose direct communication over second-hand stories. But just before sending it, your soulmate received another message. This one wasn't from the third party. It came from the person who had originally been trusted with that private conversation months ago. And the first line changed the entire situation. There's something I should have told you about what happened after you talked to me about them. Your soulmate opened that message immediately, and what followed filled in a missing piece they had never known existed. The person admitted that after hearing about you, they had mentioned part of the conversation to someone else, not intending to create trouble, but believing it was harmless. From there, the information had traveled further than expected until it eventually reached the third party. But that wasn't the revelation that disturbed your soulmate most. The person confessed that certain details had been changed along the way. Your words had been shortened. Your intentions had been interpreted by people who weren't there. And eventually, what reached your soulmate again sounded very different from what had originally been said. Suddenly, your soulmate understood how easily a private truth could become a completely different story after passing through enough hands. But one question remained: had the third party merely believed that distorted version, or had they knowingly used it? Your soulmate decided not to guess anymore. They asked one precise question: what exactly did you tell them? The response came slowly, piece by piece, and with every sentence another old misunderstanding began making sense. One detail was especially important. Apparently, the third party had once been told that your soulmate was considering contacting you, and instead of encouraging a direct conversation, they had immediately argued that waiting would be better. They insisted emotions were too complicated. They warned that you might interpret contact the wrong way. And somehow, every reason ended with the same conclusion: not yet. That phrase had controlled the situation for far too long. Not yet became another week. Another month. Another missed opportunity. Stay till the end, because your soulmate finally realized what the third party had actually been counting on. They didn't necessarily need to destroy the connection. They only needed to keep postponing it. But your soulmate had changed. The person who once accepted "not yet" as a safe answer was now staring directly at the cost of waiting. They returned to the message meant for you, but this time they didn't send it immediately. Instead, they added one final line, something vulnerable enough that there could be no confusion about why they were reaching out. Then they did the one thing the third party believed they could keep preventing: your soulmate sent it. No permission. No warning. No opportunity for anyone to interfere first. For several seconds, your soulmate simply stared at the screen, realizing the decision could no longer be taken back. The third party still believed there was time to stop this. They had no idea the message was already beyond their reach. And then something appeared beneath it that made your soulmate's heart pound even harder. The message had been delivered, and moments later, there was a sign that you might already be responding. Your soulmate watched the screen, barely moving. For a moment, the sign that you might be responding appeared, and then vanished. Seconds later, it returned. That tiny change carried more emotional weight than all the warnings they had heard for months, because now there was no third person translating your feelings, no assumptions filling the silence, no one deciding what either of you supposedly meant. It was simply you and your soulmate, separated only by the truth neither of you had been able to speak directly. Your soulmate suddenly wondered what you were thinking on the other side. Were you surprised? Guarded? Relieved? Had you waited for this moment and finally stopped expecting it? Then their phone buzzed again. But before your response arrived, the third party sent another message: "Can we talk right now?" Somehow, they had realized something had changed. Your soulmate didn't answer them. That silence was significant because, in the past, urgency from the third party had always pulled their attention away from you. This time, your soulmate refused to be redirected. Another call came through. Then another message asking what was happening. Your soulmate turned the phone face down for several seconds and made a quiet decision: whatever happened next between you would not be discussed with anyone else before it was discussed with you. That boundary changed the entire balance. The third party had believed they needed only a little more time to restore the old hesitation, but your soulmate had removed the one thing that strategy depended upon: access before action. And then your response finally arrived. Your soulmate opened it slowly, preparing themselves for anything. But the first words weren't angry. They weren't cold. They revealed that you had noticed the distance too. And there was something about that distance you had never understood. Your soulmate kept reading, and one sentence made them sit completely still. Your response suggested that at one point, you had believed your soulmate wanted the separation. That possibility had never occurred to them. All this time, your soulmate had been afraid that reaching toward you might be unwanted, while you may have interpreted their silence as a choice to stay away. Two people had been reading the same distance from opposite sides, and suddenly the months of hesitation looked very different. Your soulmate felt an immediate urge to explain everything, but they stopped themselves. This conversation was too important for another rushed message filled with half-truths. So they typed something simpler, something the third party had feared because it could move this connection beyond assumptions entirely. Your soulmate asked whether the two of you could speak directly, privately, without anyone else involved. And when your message showed as delivered, a response came back much faster than expected. What you said next gave your soulmate the first real indication that this story had never been as one-sided as they were led to believe. Your response was simple, but it carried something your soulmate hadn't allowed themselves to hope for: you agreed to talk. Not someday. Not when circumstances became perfect. You were willing to have the conversation now. Your soulmate felt the weight of months of uncertainty shift in a single instant, because suddenly there was nowhere for second-hand stories to hide. But before the conversation began, you added one unexpected sentence: "There's something I need to ask you first." Your soulmate stared at those words, sensing that whatever came next had been sitting inside you for a long time. Then the question arrived. You wanted to know why they had pulled away after a particular moment between you, because from your side, that was exactly when everything had seemed ready to become more honest. Your soulmate immediately recognized the moment you meant. And they also remembered who had spoken to them immediately afterward. That memory changed the emotional temperature completely. Your soulmate explained that after that moment, they had been warned not to misread your feelings. They had been told you might only have been emotional, that reaching out again could make you uncomfortable, and that giving you distance was supposedly the respectful choice. There was a pause on your side. Then came the revelation your soulmate wasn't prepared for: you had been told something strangely similar. You had received the impression that your soulmate needed space and that contacting them might make matters worse. Two warnings. Two different directions. The same result: silence. Don't skip, because your soulmate finally saw what the third party had feared most. It wasn't simply the possibility of your soulmate missing you. It was the possibility that you two would compare what you had been told. The moment that happened, contradictions that had survived for months could collapse in minutes. Your soulmate began asking careful questions, not trying to accuse anyone, but trying to separate facts from assumptions. Dates were compared. Conversations were remembered. And one particular sequence stood out. On the same day your soulmate had been encouraged to wait, you had apparently been given reason to believe waiting was what your soulmate wanted. That discovery didn't prove every suspicion, but it destroyed the old certainty that the distance had happened naturally. Your soulmate realized that the one thing they should have done from the beginning was the very thing the third party seemed most uncomfortable with: speak to you directly. Then another call from the third party appeared on the screen. This time your soulmate declined it without hesitation. Seconds later, a message followed: "You don't know the whole story." Your soulmate read it while still talking with you, and instead of feeling afraid, they asked the question that could finally bring everything into the open: "Then why don't we all hear the whole story at the same time?" That question changed everything because the third party had never expected to explain themselves with both of you present. Their influence had survived in separate conversations, private warnings, and carefully timed suggestions. Bringing everyone into the same conversation removed that advantage instantly. For several minutes, there was no response. Your soulmate watched the silence differently now. Before, they might have interpreted it as proof they had gone too far. This time, they recognized hesitation for what it was. Then the third party finally replied, "That's not necessary. I can explain it to you privately." Your soulmate read the sentence twice before answering, "If this concerns both of us, why should the explanation be private?" Another silence followed. And that was when your soulmate understood that the decision they had made earlier, contacting you directly, had already changed far more than either of you realized. But the third party wasn't ready to surrender control of the story. Instead of agreeing, they sent a long explanation claiming everything they had done was meant to prevent unnecessary pain. They said they had only repeated what they believed at the time. They insisted nobody had intentionally been kept apart. Some of it may even have been sincere, and your soulmate knew better than to turn uncertainty into accusations. But one detail didn't fit. The third party mentioned a specific conversation with you that, according to the timeline you had just shared, could not have happened when they claimed it did. Your soulmate noticed immediately. So did you. Stay till the end, because neither of you confronted them yet. Instead, you quietly compared one more detail, and what emerged was impossible to overlook. Both of you had been encouraged to remain silent within hours of each other, using almost identical reasoning. Your soulmate felt something settle inside them, not rage, but certainty about what needed to happen next. Whether the third party had deliberately interfered or simply allowed their own fears to shape their advice, your connection could no longer depend on their interpretation. Your soulmate told you plainly, "From now on, if you want to know what I feel, ask me. And I'll do the same with you." That was the one thing the third party had feared most. Not a dramatic confrontation, but the end of their position between you. There would be no more carrying messages. No more guessing through someone else's words. No more waiting because another person said the timing was wrong. Then your soulmate received one final message from the third party. It contained only a few words, but they revealed a deeper reason behind all that desperate delay. "I thought I had more time to tell you why I needed you two apart." Those words changed the silence completely. Your soulmate didn't respond right away, because for the first time, the third party had stopped pretending this was only about protecting someone from disappointment. "Why I needed you two apart." The sentence carried an admission hidden inside it, but your soulmate refused to fill in the blanks. They had spent too long allowing assumptions to become facts. So they asked one calm question: needed us apart for what? Minutes passed. You were still there, aware that something important was unfolding, but your soulmate didn't hide the message from you. That alone marked a major shift. Whatever explanation came next would no longer be filtered through separate conversations. Finally, the third party answered. They admitted they had been afraid that if you and your soulmate ever spoke honestly, their own relationship with your soulmate would change permanently. But there was another reason they still hesitated to reveal. The third party explained that long before your soulmate recognized how deeply they cared about you, they had noticed it. They saw the difference in your soulmate's voice when your name appeared. They noticed how certain memories involving you stayed alive even after long periods of silence. And eventually, they became convinced that if your soulmate ever received clear confirmation that you felt something meaningful too, no amount of advice would keep them emotionally where they were. So whenever circumstances seemed to bring you closer, the third party encouraged caution. They called it timing. They called it protection. They called it avoiding confusion. But beneath those explanations was something far more personal: fear of becoming less important. Don't skip. Because your soulmate then asked whether the third party had ever knowingly changed something you said. The answer didn't come immediately, and that delay suddenly felt heavier than any confession so far. When the reply finally arrived, it wasn't the clean denial your soulmate expected. The third party admitted that once, only once, according to them, they had repeated something you said without including the full context. They claimed they hadn't invented your words, but they had left out the part that would have made your true intention clearer. Your soulmate went completely still. That missing piece had influenced a decision they carried for months. Yet instead of exploding, your soulmate did something the third party never anticipated. They sent the admission directly into the open conversation with you and asked, "Is this what actually happened?" No more private versions. No more hidden interpretations. Your response came after a long pause, and when your soulmate read it, everything shifted again. You remembered the conversation, but according to you, the missing part wasn't some minor clarification. It was the one sentence that would have told your soulmate you never wanted them to disappear. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't type anything. That missing sentence forced them to revisit the moment when they had chosen distance, believing they were respecting what you wanted. Now they were discovering that your actual meaning may have been almost the opposite. Your soulmate asked you to explain exactly what you remembered. Not because they doubted you, but because they needed the truth without another interpretation layered over it. You told them that you had been uncertain, yes. You had needed patience, yes. But you had never asked them to vanish from your life. There had been one vulnerable line making that distinction clear, and somehow that was precisely the line that never reached your soulmate. Suddenly, an old memory returned. The night your soulmate almost contacted you anyway, only to be reminded that you supposedly wanted space. They had put their phone down that night believing silence was an act of respect. Now they realized silence may have been built on incomplete information. The third party tried to explain. They said the omission wasn't planned, that emotions were complicated, and that they genuinely believed distance would prevent both of you from getting hurt. Your soulmate listened, but something fundamental had already changed. Intentions could be debated forever, the consequence could not. Two people had spent months responding to versions of each other instead of speaking directly. Your soulmate finally said, "You should have let us decide what our own words meant." There was no shouting. No dramatic accusation. That calmness made the boundary even stronger. Then your soulmate turned their attention back to you and asked something they had been afraid to ask from the beginning. "If you had known I wasn't choosing to leave you, what would you have done?" Your answer came with an honesty that made your soulmate's chest tighten. You said you would have asked them to stay long enough for the two of you to figure things out yourselves. That was the moment the third party's remaining hope began slipping away. Their entire advantage had depended on unfinished conversations, and now you and your soulmate were finishing them one by one. But your soulmate wasn't interested in recreating the past. They wanted to know what was possible now. So they asked you whether too much time had passed, whether the misunderstandings had changed things beyond repair, or whether there was still something worth exploring between you. For the first time, the answer wouldn't travel through anyone else. The third party couldn't soften it, delay it, or reinterpret it. There was only your voice and your soulmate waiting on the other side. Then you gave an answer that neither of them expected. You admitted that something had changed, but not in the way your soulmate feared. The distance hadn't erased what you felt. It had made you realize exactly what you would require before allowing your soulmate close again, and your next words revealed the one choice your soulmate would have to make if they truly wanted another chance. Your soulmate waited for those words, knowing this was no longer about proving the third party wrong. It was about proving that the old pattern would never be allowed to return. And your condition was surprisingly simple. If the two of you were going to explore this connection again, there could be no more decisions based on someone else's interpretation. If something felt wrong, you would ask. If your soulmate became afraid, they would tell you. If either of you needed space, that space would be requested directly, not delivered through another person. Your soulmate understood immediately why this mattered. You weren't demanding promises about the future. You were asking for honesty in the present. Then you asked one question that made everything painfully real. Can you actually do that when someone you care about disagrees with you? Your soulmate knew exactly who you meant, and this time there was no hesitation in their answer. They told you yes, but they also knew saying it wasn't enough. So your soulmate did something the third party never believed they would have the courage to do. They returned to that private conversation and set a clear boundary. Your connection with them could continue only if your relationship with you was no longer discussed, managed, or influenced behind the scenes. No more warnings presented as facts. No more carrying fragments of conversations. No more asking other people what you supposedly meant. The third party reacted immediately. They insisted your soulmate was making a serious decision while emotional. They asked for one more conversation before anything changed permanently. But those words only confirmed what your soulmate had finally understood. The third party still believed another conversation could buy more time. Don't skip, because your soulmate's response was only one sentence: "I've already given this too much time." That sentence closed a door the third party had depended on remaining open. Yet something unexpected happened next. Instead of arguing again, the third party became quiet and finally admitted there was one last thing your soulmate deserved to know. They said their fear had never been only about losing influence or becoming less important. There had been a particular moment from the past, something they witnessed between you and your soulmate, that convinced them your connection could become much deeper if neither of you was interrupted. Your soulmate immediately asked what moment they meant. The third party hesitated, then described an encounter your soulmate remembered vividly, the exact moment when you had looked at them and almost said something before someone else entered the situation. Your soulmate had always wondered what you were about to say. Now the third party claimed they knew. And when your soulmate asked how, the answer created an entirely new mystery. Apparently, after your soulmate left that day, you finished the sentence. But you said it to someone who was still in the room. Your soulmate felt the entire conversation narrow down to that single unfinished sentence. They remembered the moment clearly, the hesitation in your eyes, the way you started speaking, and the interruption that made everything stop before the words could come out. For months, your soulmate had convinced themselves it probably meant nothing. Now they learned that you had finished the thought after they walked away. What did they say? Your soulmate asked. The third party hesitated again, and that hesitation mattered because they had apparently carried this knowledge the entire time. Finally, they admitted that your words had revealed something much deeper than uncertainty. You had said you were afraid of how strongly the connection was affecting you, but you didn't want your soulmate to mistake that fear for rejection. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why the third party had become so concerned after that day. They hadn't been guessing whether something existed between you. They had heard enough to know it did. But your soulmate refused to accept another second-hand version without checking it with you. They returned directly to your conversation and described the memory, then asked whether you remembered what you had said after they left. There was a long pause. Your soulmate could almost feel you deciding how much of that old vulnerability you were ready to reopen. Then you confirmed the heart of it. Yes, you had been overwhelmed. Yes, you had been afraid. But your fear had come from realizing the connection mattered more than you expected, not from wanting it to disappear. That distinction hit your soulmate hard. For so long, both of you had treated fear as evidence that you should move apart, when it may actually have been evidence that something meaningful needed an honest conversation. And now another question surfaced. If the third party knew that from the beginning, why had they allowed your soulmate to believe the opposite? The answer came reluctantly. The third party admitted that hearing those words had frightened them because they realized your soulmate's feelings might eventually be returned. Until then, they had convinced themselves your connection was temporary, one-sided, or destined to fade. That day destroyed that assumption. And afterward, every delay gave them comfort because every day you remained apart made the connection seem easier to contain. But now your soulmate understood the deepest truth behind everything. The third party hadn't feared one message, one meeting, or one confession. They feared what would happen when you and your soulmate finally stopped relying on everyone else and discovered the truth together. Your soulmate looked at your open conversation and made another decision. They asked you to meet, or speak properly, face to face if possible, because some truths deserved more than messages on a screen. Your response came quickly. You agreed. But before the details could be arranged, you added one unexpected request: there was something you needed your soulmate to bring into that conversation, something they had kept hidden from you since the very beginning. Your soulmate knew immediately that you weren't asking for an object. You were asking them to bring the truth they had never been brave enough to say out loud. For a moment, they tried to guess which hidden feeling you meant, but your next message removed the uncertainty. When we talk, don't tell me what anyone else thought you should do. Tell me what you wanted. That sentence reached the place your soulmate had avoided for months. Because beneath every warning, every delay, and every misunderstanding, there had always been a private answer. Your soulmate had wanted to reach for you. They had wanted to ask whether the connection was real on your side too. They had wanted to stop pretending distance felt natural. And now, with the third party's influence finally outside the conversation, your soulmate realized the hardest truth wasn't what someone else had done. It was how